I grew up in Chicago in a neighborhood called South Chicago, which is the first Latino settlement in the history of Illinois. It's on the far southeast side of Chicago, so it's right up against Indiana. If you look at the old steel mills, that's where we were, right before you get to the Skyway. My grandfather came in the 1920s from Mexico looking for work, looking for opportunity. And if you had a strong back and strong arms, you could work in the steel mills like he did, the grain elevators, which he also did. There was the railroad. So there was a lot of work. My grandmother came to Chicago en route from Mexico to Michigan with her parents to pick strawberries. They were farm workers, and they stopped in South Chicago. It was a little oasis of Mexicanism. So she got to Chicago, met my grandfather. They stayed and had 17 kids. We had this huge family. Obviously, my dad's family had brothers and sisters who had cousins. So there were what seemed like hundreds of Castro cousins, and we all used to go by my grandfather's house and on Brandon Avenue, right across the street from Our Lady of Guadalupe Church, which was a church that my grandparents helped build. Well, my dad, who never finished high school, he dropped out of high school to go into the Korean conflict. When he came back, he was very involved in community issues. My grandfather also was, even though they had 17 kids and they were not very well off financially, he always had room at his table for others, and he was also very involved in the community and in the church. Whenever anybody needed help with the law, they'd call my grandfather, even though he had no training. He was like the local curandero, the doctor, the local lawyer. He'd go out and help everyone. And I think that instilled in my father a sense of community involvement. My dad eventually became a social worker, so I literally saw at his knees the needs that existed in terms of programs for youth, anti-violence programs, economic development, quite literally going with my dad to bring food to the poor. And eventually my father decided to run for alderman. And at the time, the original Mayor Daley was in power, and you had to go ask the original Mayor Daley, as did everyone, for approval. And I remember as a young boy, my father getting ready for that meeting. And when he came back, he seemed, a little upset and depressed. And I asked him what happened. He said he asked the original Mayor Daley if he could run for alderman. And the original mayor said, no, Mexicans don't vote. And that stuck with me for a long time. And here I saw my father, who to me is, the man on the pedestal, being told by someone that he can't do something because of his ethnicity. And I vowed even then as a child that I would never be in that position. A few years later, my dad did run after, power change in the city, and he ran for Democratic Ward Committeeman, beat the established party candidate to become the first Latino in the history of Illinois to be elected a committeeman. And I was very involved in his campaign. And I saw that the people that had their reins on the hands of power in Chicago, making decisions affecting my community, weren't from my community, didn't look like me, and frankly, many of them were lawyers. And that's when I decided, you know what, I want to be a lawyer. I trained and became partner in some of the most prestigious law firms in the country and in the world, but I never lost my involvement and my commitment to community service. Now I'm fortunate that I'm able to work on projects in my consulting practice, Castro Synergies, where I work exclusively with clients that are either corporations, nonprofits, entrepreneurs that want to have a positive social impact in the community. That's my litmus test. If it's not going to help the broader community, I'm not going to work on that. Luckily, I also have the ability to serve the public in two really important public roles. Governor Pat Quinn appointed me in December of 2009 chairman of the Illinois Human Rights Commission, where we protect individuals from discrimination under Illinois' law, the Illinois Human Rights Act. And 2 years ago, President Barack Obama appointed me chairman of the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. I think that when you look at communities of color in particular, we need to come together. But I think we still view the world in many ways from our own silos. And I think we need to break down as many of those barriers as we can. Because when you really look at it, we all have the same challenges we're facing pretty much. And some of us have faced those challenges before others. And so we can teach other communities how not to reinvent the wheel and come together to try to address some of the challenges that we're facing. Economic challenges, educational challenges. I really believe education and access to education and educational equity is really the civil rights issue of this era. To me, it's an honor, but it's always interesting to receive recognition for something that you love to do, something that you would do regardless of the recognition. I was taught to be someone who helps others and tries to make a difference. That's what I tell my sons. That's what Castros do. It's not something that you strive to do, is to do the work that you do to get an award. You do the work that you do to have an impact. And by getting this award, what the Chicago Cultural Alliance and its members are saying to me is that I have had that impact. I've had that impact not only in my Latino community, but more importantly, across communities of color, across ethnic communities, across all communities.